Hey everyone, welcome, welcome, welcome. We see the number just going up higher and higher. Welcome to the Essentials. While we wait for more people to show up, feel free to drop where you're signing in from. I'm sure we've got lots of people from all over the world, so let us know where you're logging in from. And we'll get started in just a minute or so. Oops. And you can let us know in the chat box because as a webinar, it's chat or Q&A. So yeah, please say hello in the chat. I can go first.
We just opened the chat up. It was disabled, but it should be enabled now.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
What? Colombia, Iraq, San Francisco, India, Belgium, Montreal, Jamaica. I love to see it. Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Finland. Oh my gosh. We just got to take this on tour, y'all. Every time I'm just like, can we just take the essentials on tour? I love it.
I second that idea.
This is amazing.
Wow.
Uganda, Los Angeles, South Africa, the Bronx, Indonesia, Salami. Oh my goodness, Canada. Welcome everyone. Oh, and I realized other people are not seeing the locations. So if you're typing, make sure you do host and panelists because that's how we're seeing all these locations, but not everyone may not be able to see that. Brazil, welcome. DC, yes, that's where I'm coming from right now as well. Mexico, amazing. Keep it coming, y'all.
Wow. So cool. All right, where's our person from Antarctica? Where are you? Cool, cool. Yeah, I think we'll wait just 30 more seconds and we will get started. So keep saying hello as you join us. Oh yes, and really huge gold star for anyone tuning in Africa or Asia or Australia. You are awesome for being here despite the late hour.
Or if you're really early in the West Coast.
Yeah, yeah, true.
It's 7 a.m. in California. So thank you everyone for tuning in. We know there's so much y'all could be doing on a weekend. So we appreciate you coming back. If this is, not your first time or this is your first time, welcome.
Awesome. Well, I think we could go ahead and get started. Polly, how you feel?
Do this.
Yeah?
Yes.
All right, cool. Well, thank you, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. As you probably already know, the Essentials are free online classes about navigating the photojournalism industry, made in partnership with grassroots photo organizations working toward inclusivity, equity, and access in the media. They are the Everyday Projects, Black Women Photographers, and Photo Wings. The Everyday Projects is a global community of visual storytellers, documentary photographers, journalists, artists, and more, all committed to using imagery to combat harmful misperceptions and to rise above persistent inequality. As a nonprofit, we work to provide opportunities for our global community and to provide structure, support, and direction for the diverse and worldwide range of everyday photography groups. Molly?
Yes, and Black women photographers. I see some regular faces in the chat, some members that I know. It's a global organization of now over 1,200 Black women non-binary identifying photographers spanning over 50 countries. And just like my friends at the Everyday Projects, we work to provide equity to the field of, photography where we're at here, and specifically for those who identify and, providing a safe space for us to navigate this industry. And as Danielle mentioned, this is free 99, free. This is our third season doing essentials. And again, because we want to make sure we have, as many people as possible who can attend this, to make sure that there's access to this free knowledge. We can't do this alone. And so thank you so much to our beautiful organization, Photo Wings, for sponsoring this to make sure it stays free. Photo Wings is a nonprofit organization dedicated to utilizing the power of photography to further deep thinking, communication, and action. Their extensive online content and Photo Weeks outreach have myriad educational applications and possibilities for people everywhere, including you all today. So thank you so much, Photo Wings.
Yes, I am so happy to be here today with Polly, Irungu, my co-host in crime, and of course Hannah and Annie, who you will be hearing from shortly. I have been wanting to share this stage so long for Polly, so I'm very excited. My name is Danielle Villasana. I'm a co-host of The Essentials, and also a community team member of the Everyday Projects and an independent photojournalist with a passion for community development and education. You can see some of my colleagues' names here too, like I mentioned, Annie and Hannah, and then of course, Rebecca Gibeon, who is behind the scenes helping with tech. So thank you so much, Rebecca, and Austin Merrill, who happens to be in the audience. Who along with Peter DeCampo are the co-founders of the Everyday Projects, and also a shout out to a team member, Washira, for all of their help with the behind the scenes good stuff. And Washira will be here with us as well. And I know I've gushed over Polly a lot already, but I just wanted to emphasize again the amazing work she's doing elevating the voices of Black creatives. So please, if possible, consider making a donation to BWP, big or small. It all counts to support their initiatives and operations.
And as we mentioned, this is the Essentials. And for those who've seen the promo, it's a great jam-packed weekend with incredible instructors who are literally the best in their field. And so we're so lucky to have them all. This is our third season. So if you missed out on season 1 and season 2, you can go to our respective websites and replay those conversations at any point, because it's really just a continuation. So for example, right now we're about to hear from pitching from a photographer's perspective. Last season, we had pitching from an editor's perspective. So each season builds off of each other. And so do not miss out. Go replay those previous seasons. Thanks to the Everyday Projects and our other sponsors, we've been able to have them transcribed in various languages, Spanish and French, so you can go replay those in those languages as well. And we're just so lucky to have everybody who's joining us this weekend. So if at any point you have a question throughout these presentations, throughout the conversation, feel free to drop it in the Q&A box. Do not be shy. No questions too small, too dumb, whatever to ask. This is why we're all here, 10 a.m. Eastern my time, 7 a.m. West Coast time, whatever, 10 p.m. in Beijing, as somebody else mentioned. This is why we're all here. So ask while you have these incredible and busy people in the industry, ask away, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible.
Yes, as Polly said, definitely these are recorded. They're available on these websites. So please take note of all these websites, our social media handles, so you can keep an eye on that. And then future cool stuff that we might be up to, that we'll probably be up to. So, also, before we get started, please save this link for tomorrow's webinar, which is different from today's. I'm going to drop that in the chat right now. We'll also be sending out a internal newsletter from the Everyday Project. So just keep your inboxes, keep your eye on your inboxes for that link. So without further ado, I think we've gone over all of the housekeeping stuff, right, Polly? We didn't miss anything.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, cool. So without further ado, let's get started with Hannah.
Yes, I'm so excited for this presentation. I mean, like, I don't know, like, how we're like, I don't know how, you know, a lot of people don't know the behind the scenes, like when we were like brainstorming and just like thinking who does what, I was like, there's no way they can get Hannah. There's no way. There's no way that they can actually get Hannah to do this. Like, Hannah is incredibly busy. And Hannah said yes and did this. And so I'm so excited, y'all. We're in for such a treat. Hannah has just such an impressive bio that is very humble. And so I'm going to read a short snippet of it. For those who may not know her and her work, Hannah is a Filipino photographer focusing on bringing historical memory and current events home by looking at how they shape daily life. She's been published in the New York Times, National Geographic, the Washington Post, among many others. She is the recipient of the Tim Hetherington Visionary Award and the ICP Infinity Award for Documentary Practice and Visual Journalism. She was commissioned for the Nobel Peace Prize exhibition in 2021 and is also a Nat Geo explorer and is currently a fellow at the Columbia University's Institute for Ideas and Imagination in Paris. And today, Hannah will be discussing everything there is to know about pitching. So Hannah, it is all yours.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. I am never too busy. I'm just going to start my timer because I can talk, I can chat. But thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to do this. Let me just start my presentation. So it's very nice to hear, you know, like all these things when you talk about your bio when it comes to work, but I want to introduce myself just as me. My name is Hannah Reyes Morales. I am a Filipina photographer. I grew up in the messy city of Manila in a home with my family of more than 14 people in one house. I was born and raised in Manila, and as a child, photographs were always, you know, one of the things that really moved me, and it was the language that spoke to me the most. I grew up looking through history books and trying to get as many pictures as I could, but whenever I would see pictures of Filipinos or representations of Filipinos, the images that I would see would look like this. These are images from the World's Fair in the US, where they brought indigenous Igorot Filipinos to what was then known as the World's Fair, where they would literally have people on display like a human zoo, and they would take back souvenirs and they would take pictures with Filipinos and take them home as souvenirs. These images wound up in the Philippines and ended up being sort of how I perceived myself as a Filipino and how I perceived like the Western gaze of the Philippines. And that really, you know, affected how I sort of like made sense of who I was, my place in the world. This was the kind of imagery that defined who we were in sort of like a global context. I remember though that when I was growing up, every time I would see these images, my gaze would land on the face of my fellow Filipino, and usually their defiant eyes, you know, would lock with mine, and I would look at them eye to eye and see somebody who's my equal and somebody who's just like me. And that sort of like has been at the core of my practice and how I try to see and imagine people. This is just like a very short introduction of sort of where I'm coming from and my perspective of what shaped how I see photography, its use of what why we should tell stories and why we should be taking pictures. Later on, I would take matters into my own hands. This is the first picture that I ever made, according to my mother. It's also in a zoo, but this time it's in the Manila Zoo. It's of my own mother. And it was my attempt at sort of like just making my own image, my own interpretation of the world around me. And even if I feel like I've hopefully gone a little further than this image, where my mom's head is cropped, I also think that in a lot of ways, not much has changed. This is still how I want to see people. This is still how I want, like, this is still the level of comfort in which I want to work when I work with people in front of me and I have my camera in my hands. So I want to start by sharing, before anything else, I'm going to share with you two projects today, and I will talk about, and then I will sort of like deconstruct how I came to think about the project and how I pitched it for publication. So since, the making of this image, I've become a working photographer. I'm now a photojournalist. I have been based in Manila and Southeast Asia for most of my career. I'm currently in Paris, as they mentioned. But in 2016, 2017, I was in the Philippines and covering the drug war, which, was a very violent and bloody occasion in our history in the Philippines. And there were a lot of photographers there. And we were covering a lot of crime scenes at night. And I remember every time there were gunshots, people in the communities that we were working in would wake up and look around the dead body. There were children, there were mothers, there were families. And I remember one of the evenings that I was working, I saw after the dead bodies had been put in body bags, after all of the sort of like hustle of the police, of the press being there, I saw a mother. After the baby had woken up, I saw a mother try to put the baby back to sleep and was trying to sing a lullaby to the child, in order to quiet the child and to sort of, bring the child's attention back to her after something incredibly violent had just happened to their community. And I started thinking about this song, the lullaby, and I started researching and imagining, how else it's being used around the world. And that moment that I was documenting in the Philippines turned into a 1.5 year story where I just went around the world looking at lullabies in different places. The lullabies took me to the Turkish-Syrian border, where I followed Syrian migrants resettling in their homes in Turkey, and they were migrating the lullabies with them at home. So this is Khadija Al-Muhammad with her children. And she told me that, when she was still living in Syria, she would sing sweet lullabies. And now that after the war, her lullabies have been about the war, and the lullabies that she sings to her children are songs of war, about drone strikes, about keeping children safe in the streets. I visited their family and documented their nighttime rituals there. I went to Liberia, where I looked at young mothers and how teenage mothers were making sense of their communities. I watched how their communities came together over bedtime stories about how caregiving was this shared community practice. And I looked at beyond, lullabies. I was looking at folklore and nighttime stories and nighttime fables that were being told to children. I went with this is Christiana Gama, who was singing hope into her lullabies. The lyrics of her lullaby was, "The boy will buy my car, the boy will build my house." So she had hope that her baby would, bring her to a brighter future. I looked at lullabies in Mongolia, where, there was a public health crisis with toxic air. I looked at how traditional lullabies were being sung by caregivers there, but they were putting in healing words to help their children heal from the toxic air when they were coughing late at night. I went to communities most affected by hazardous air and looked at how caregivers were using lullabies to make safety for children who were coming from difficult homes, while they're playing lullabies while an air purifier was humming in the background. And in the middle of the story, the pandemic happened. So I went to look at how caregivers separated, nurses and doctors who are isolating from their families, went home to, read bedtime stories with them. And I watched how lullabies would bring families who are isolating from each other together, and saw how, how prescient this little song was. And then I just want to play like one lullaby before I continue, I think. I'm not sure. There. So, I gathered all of this. This is a very short way of explaining quite a big story that I worked on for a year and a half. But I wanted to show that, for this particular story, I was working not just with visuals, but with different kinds of media. So I just wanted to share one of the lullabies. This is the lullaby sung by the Syrian grandmother to her child to remind him of Syria, which he had never been to.
يلا ينام يلا ينام لهديله طير الحمام روح يا حمام لا تصدق بضحك على زيده لينام نيمته بالعلية وخفت عليه من الحية وغنيله يا راضية بلكي ع صوتك بينام.
So the story published on National Geographic magazine, it was a story that I wrote. It appeared both on the pages as well as digitally. It turned into talks, it turned into a radio show. It was really exciting just to see how, one little idea that I thought about when I was in the Philippines turned into this whole multidisciplinary multimedia project that I never imagined. I'm already at 9 minutes. So I just wanted to sort of go back from, like sharing with you like where the images went, and talk about just the process from pitching to publication, how that fit into sort of like the greater picture of a practice. So for me, I just want to share with you this little pitching is actually a very small part of the practice, right? Like you're doing so much more things when you're doing your photography. And in fact, actual photography is also a very small part of the practice. I will talk about the larger picture maybe later on, and we can talk about it a little bit more in the Q&A, but I just wanted to bring you guys to, so, I talked about my ideas, and that's always where I start in the preparation that I do. But pitching, actually, I don't always know where that falls into the practice. It's like, do I do it here while I'm preparing or before I prepare? Do I do it in a midway point after I've actually already taken some pictures? Do I do it when I'm finished with any of this? So actually pitching is this thing in the practice that sort of moves around depending on the project. And it's, for that reason, it's a little bit hard to sort of put my finger on, what the actual rule of thumb is when it comes to pitching. And I think that that's something that I just wanted to just very briefly share, the fact that it's actually quite flexible, and that it's not something that has sort of like a rule for when you pitch. So I encourage, my students always to think about what their own practice looks like. And I think everybody's looks very different, right? But sometimes it helps, when you're freelancing, to have something like a mind map, because it actually helps me think of like the kinds, when you're freelancing, it's very hard sometimes when you have days where you don't have assignments, for days when you're maybe just waiting for emails. It's actually very hard to think about, what am I meant to do in my work day to day? So sometimes I will go back into the mind map and see, oh, actually, I haven't updated my website in a while. Oh, actually, I haven't shared something in a while. Oh, actually, I haven't, tried to research new publications or new photographers. And it's really, really helpful just to have like a bigger picture of what your practice looks like. The fact that our, practice isn't just made of taking pictures, editing them, and publishing them, right? Like there's so much more that comes into it. And so pitching for me is just like one small part of a practice. And in many ways, I actually see it as something that it's useful, but it's not the end goal to publish. Meaning I have a bigger mission in my practice. I have a bigger vision for what I want my photography to be, in what I think is, a small contribution in like photographic history, right? And often I think, what's stopping me from pitching before, when I was starting out, was I was afraid, and I was very afraid of rejection. But as soon as I started thinking about pitching as part of something sort of like bigger, like a bigger ecosystem of work, and that actually it was useful in order to get my own mission out, and not just like the publication's interests. That's when I started being a little braver and thinking that I actually had something to contribute. One of the things that I think is important that often we don't always ask is, when we're thinking of an idea, why does it need to be told with visuals? And I start with this question because when I was thinking about lullabies and I was shopping that idea around to editors, they were like, well, I don't know about the visuals of that. It's a song, like it sounds like a podcast, right? And so I needed to sort of have like an internal justification to myself for how it's gonna look. And when you're pitching coming from the point of view of a photographer, because different publications, often they'll get pitches both from writers, sometimes from filmmakers. But for you as a photographer, why would you want to tell the story, and why would you, what would the visuals be? That's always something that's very important for me personally, is that I always know what the visuals might look like. Obviously, sometimes it turns into something else than what you thought, but it's always good to think about how this might be a visual story. So I already went through why should you pitch. So when I come up with ideas for photo-based projects, earlier when I was talking about lullabies, for example, the idea came very organically. It came from paying attention to my surroundings. It came from paying attention to the scene that was happening while I was on assignment. But actually, there's so many ways that ideas come to us, right? For me personally, I do a lot of research. So, there's visual research. So what do you see around you? It's not just like what you consciously look at on Instagram, but actually like just the little things that you notice. It can be paintings, it can be films, it can be graffiti on the walls. And of course, there's data research. But one of the things that I really appreciated recently is using primary sources, which is like, you're not getting something that's already data, right? Like I learned about this because I collaborated with like a history teacher who was teaching history in high school, and she was telling her students that one of the ways that they can get information is through primary sourcing. And I'd always had a hang up about my education. Like I always thought that, I wanted to study more. And then when she said to me that like one way of getting information was through primary sourcing, I actually realized that photography itself is an act of primary sourcing. And so in that way, like our learning never ends, because we're out in the world trying to see and confront realities. And actually that's that makes sense as research material, and it might not be the end product, but even when you're photographing almost like aimlessly, there's primary sourcing there that you're doing that actually could be quite useful. Personally, dialogues are a big part of my practice. I'm always having conversations with people and always, like questioning people and always debating and always arguing and always having dialogues about, what's important, what do we want to see? And I try to always convert it in my mind to how could that, I always try to play. I have an exercise in my head when I have an interesting conversation. I turn it around in my head and ask myself, how could this be an image? How could this perhaps be a photo story? I always wonder that. Memory and past experiences is something that I draw on very deeply because I think that our perspectives are definitely informed by our past experiences. I try to think about my memories not necessarily in spoken narrative, but in visuals. What was the kind of home I grew up in? What was the light like? What was the room like? What were the things that were always coming to me visually? And often ideas will come out of that. So for lullabies, for example, one of the memories that I had was my mom was a single mom and she was a working mom. So at night, I would be put to sleep by different women and different caregivers. They all had different songs to sing to me. Sometimes it was in a language that I couldn't understand. I had some aunties who were much more mischievous with how they tried to put me to sleep, and they were singing like more pop songs, almost raunchy music. My mom was definitely very all out on praise songs and Christian music, and that's how she put me to sleep. But all these women were bringing in different, their different sensibilities and how they cared for me. And that most certainly came up in my stories, and that's something that I explore quite extensively when I'm photographing. Sensory information, so scents, sounds, touch, all of these things. And then obviously paying attention to what you consume. What is your media diet? What are the things that you're reading visually? These are how I come up with my ideas, roughly. So when I'm preparing and researching, before I even get to pitching, I'm researching. There's two kinds of research that I do. One is just hard research on my computer or on books. And then the other is visual research. So I just want to give you sort of like an idea of how I research for lullabies. This is the document that I had. And as you can see, it's very intensive. It's very insane. Each place had its own folder. I read so many different kinds of papers around lullabies. I read about bedtime. I read about caregiving. I read about all these topics. I read about sleep. I read so much different kinds of research, and that all came in because I pitched it not only for publication, but I also pitched it as a grant. And so, there's many ways that pitching comes in, but I think at the heart of it, if you're doing your research right, there's things you can pull from the research that will help you make a more strategic pitch by the time that you get there. And then there's also visual research. This is the research that I did before I even photographed. So I was looking at paintings, I was looking at nighttime scenes. I was trying to fill my mind with how it might look like or how the final project might look like. So when I make a pitch, what are the things that I think about? One, there are many ways to pitch. It's not a hard and fast rule. Like for National Geographic, for example, pitching is a much, much longer process and often very research heavy. When I pitch for a newspaper, it's much shorter. And I'll show you an example of a pitch in a bit. But a few things that I want to draw into your attention is that when I pitch, I personalize the pitch. So I'm not only thinking of the publication, I'm thinking of the editor. What would be useful to the person receiving this, right? Like, it's like, I'm not making a PR kit, right? Like I'm actually trying to place a story, and I have to think about not just the publication, but I have to think of the person on the other side. What would be useful for the editor? What can she bring to her meeting, to her pitch meeting, that would be exciting to her colleagues? What would make my editor look good, right? And I'm trying to help my editor do that. I make sure that it's not repetitive, meaning if they've done a topic that, like if I'm pitching something that on a topic they'd already done, I want to make sure that it's a new angle, a new take, or different, something surprising. All of these things, I try my best to personalize it. Obviously, research is, as you saw earlier, research is very much part of my practice. And yeah, so I said this earlier, but it's definitely when I pitch, that's the most important thing, that I do it with the person on the receiving end of my email. So I don't tend to flood this person with research. I only pull the best parts of the research. It's concise, it's efficient, it's something that they would be interested in. At the pitch stage, I'm trying to tell a story already. I'm not trying to bombard an editor with too much information. I try to make it interesting for them. So it's always very like, I try to think of the human connection between myself and the editor. And then and maybe we can discuss this later on, is at what point do you pitch? I've pitched stories that I've already started, meaning lullabies. I made a proof of concept, meaning I shot one chapter that, I recorded one lullaby. I spent one night with one family just to help the editor visualize what this could look like. I've pitched projects that were already finished. And obviously I've also pitched projects that I've not even started on in places that I haven't been to. So there's different times that you can pitch, and depending on the needs of either the editor or yourself, you can pitch at different points of the project. So I just want to share one shorter story, because lullabies is very involved, and it's not something that I will do very often. I'll probably have a few projects like this in me, but not infinite. I want to share one shorter assignment, like a 3-day assignment, of how I pitched that and how it got published. So this is a pitch that I sent the New York Times about whale sharks. So as you can see, it's the one on the right. It's just 2 paragraphs. It's not very long. It's well researched, but it, is only pulling like bits of the research. I can't read it. There you go. Sorry. Zoom. I wanted to do a story on whale sharks, and I had not done underwater photography for publication. So I had to, balance out sort of like what I knew I could do, which is like sort of like documenting a human element of an environmental story or a conservation story and underwater photography, but making sure that it was like very heavy on sort of like the human aspect. But I did a story about whale shark tourism in the Philippines, and sort of like the tension between the conservation community and the local community who were feeding the whale sharks. I knew that this was, like a story that I'd always wanted to do, but I had never been in a point in my career where I felt confident enough to try to pull like a publication into funding me to try to do underwater photography. So I wrote a pitch to my editor. They gave me 3 days to do it, if I'm not mistaken. And they said yes, because it was like very low cost for them because it was in my local country. And then they went with the story, and this pitch turned into this story. And I'll rush through the images. Sorry. And ultimately that became this. So it was like a story that ran in the New York Times. And it really just came from these 2 paragraphs. And that's sort of what enabled me. It came from these 2 paragraphs that I sent them. It was not in my own town, like it was a flight away, but with enough research and with enough sort of like, I guess like tinkering through like what could be a good angle, they ended up allowing me to do this story. I think I'm gonna end my presentation here because I think I'm a little bit over time. And I wanna maybe move along my presentation into a Q&A or a discussion. So thank you
I
so
just
much.
want to say, wow. I mean, I don't know if you see all the beautiful messages coming in the chat, but that was just brilliant.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that. And yes, let's do this Q&A. There's so many great questions. keep dropping in those questions in the Q&A box where we can see them and for others can see what other questions are being asked as well. And we will just try to power through because there's so many great questions here. Danielle, do you want to kick it off?
Yes, I do. And wow, Hannah, oh,
Your
I was-
mind.
I was taking notes and I loved what you said about I have a bigger mission for my practice and how that helps me sort of overcome fear, because you know, we're so connected to the work that we do that rejection and putting yourself out there can be so scary. But I love what you said about sort of thinking of the longer term goal that really, you know, it's like refocusing on your heart and like why you're doing this, right? Not for the tear sheets, not for the bylines, but for the people in the community you're photographing. So yeah, I love that. I wrote it down. I'm gonna think back on that when I'm going through hard times myself. So yeah, just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful work. We do have lots of questions though, so I'm gonna stop talking. Here we go. Okay. So some of the questions are similar, so we're gonna try our best to like put similar themed questions together in one. So we're gonna try to get to all of y'all's questions. They're coming in fast and furious. But first and foremost, I think this is a great question that applies to a lot of different you know, experiences that we go through as photographers. But when you're going into communities with such vulnerable topics, how do you introduce yourself? How do you ask people to let you into their lives or document these very intimate moments? And how difficult was it to gain such intimate access? So similar questions there.
I think it really depends, and it varies from house to house, community to community, person to person. I suppose there's a few rule of thumbs, which is one, like just being truthful. I think like the most important thing is that you're straightforward and honest with why you're there. And sometimes that's being straightforward with the hard fact that journalism doesn't really help people in communities. It's, you know, like I always tell people that because, you know, often in vulnerable communities, they're like, well, will this give us food, or will this sort of like help us, pay for our rent next month? It's like, if people will see that, will they make a donation? And it's just being straightforward with like, you know, like this is not that. Sometimes I tell them, you know, like, oh, I'm not sure yet if this is going to get published, right? Like even that. So just being honest about why you're there and what you're doing is the most important thing. I think the other most important rule of thumb is like, you don't just go there without any support from anyone from the community, right? Like whether you've done your research about, you know, who these people are, what the community culture is. The most important thing for me is that I always have somebody from the community with me. So even if I'm in my city, Manila, I will still go with local community members to take me around different places. I don't just drop in as me. I will often try to find a person like this to sort of guide me, because, you know, it's just respectful, right? Like it's just more respectful to come and not just assume that you can knock on people's doors and they'll let you in just because you're, you know, like you're also Filipino. I tend to make sure that I have somebody from within the community guiding me and helping me understand like which families might be right for the story that I'm working on. The other things that I think are helpful to do are, I don't immediately take pictures, meaning like I of course have my camera and I'm not fooling anybody that I'm not a journalist, you know, I'm not trying to trick them into letting me into their lives. I come there, I have my camera, but I don't immediately shoot. So definitely like just spending some time, and I mean, COVID made it very hard to do this. Like COVID was the opposite, where, you know, keeping people safe was the most important thing. And so you have to be there at the shortest possible amount of time. But generally when it's not pre-COVID, and also now, I make sure that I actually have conversations with them about things that don't have anything to do with my story. So just having like a sort of person-to-person connection but yeah, I think it's different per person and per story. And I think one of the most important things is that you're just always observing, listening, and being sensitive to people's body language, people's levels of comfort. Like, I think that's the most important thing, is that I'm trying to pay attention to what they're saying or not saying, what they're comfortable with and what they're not comfortable with, when I should be, maybe giving the family a break and, going out for a meal myself, things like this. I think those are maybe the most important things for me.
Awesome. So much golden nuggets there. We have so many questions coming in. We probably won't be able to get to all of them, but another question that's sort of similarly themed is kind of the question marks around the editor. So for example, how do you understand that this particular pitch will attract an editor? How do you choose who to pitch to? When there's a certain type of assignment that you haven't done, how do you motivate an editor to trust you with that work? How would you recommend doing it when the editor doesn't know you? So a lot of questions around like, chicken or the egg kind of thing. Like when people say, oh, pitch an editor with your idea. And if you're like, but I don't know any editors, like, how did you kind of overcome that when you were first starting off? And also if you could just quickly, like, what is a pitch? Even what is that word and what does it mean? Yeah, so let's start with that. The editor question.
Right. I remember when I was first starting out in photography and I hadn't really been to the US, and I hadn't been to Europe, and I was just starting out, and editors seemed like people in the clouds, just like imaginary folks that were in other places. And I think I remember trying to figure out like what that meant, and like thinking about how I could connect to them, or how they could even like get to know me when they were so far away. I think it's a difficult question because I think there's just so many layers to it, right? Like obviously there are editors that you end up meeting either from portfolio reviews or from different kinds of photography events, workshops, all of these things. I think how I started with that was paying attention to the stories that an editor had worked on, if that makes sense. So I don't just look at the publication. I try to look at like what the editor's interest might be, the kinds of photographers that the editor tends to work on. And so the relationship then starts being like a real one, because it's not just like transactional that like you editor will be the one to help me publish this story, right? Like it's actually like you're actually working together. And by the time like my editors now, I've gone from like really thinking that this abstract idea of what an editor was, I went from that to suddenly now like, my editor for Lullabies, for example, was Mallory Benedict, and she most certainly had like a strong input in the work and how it looked and how it ended up being published and how it became very multimedia. Like a huge part of that was through collaborating with her. But I don't think you get to that point unless you are actually paying attention to sort of like editors as people who are in their own rights, like very creative as well, and who are like true collaborators, right? And I think that that's just true for any kind of professional relationship, is that you actually have to observe who these people are, not just their publication, but who they are as creatives. That was one thing that I learned maybe a little late in my career. I think paying attention to the sections and the desks is also important. What kinds of sections there are in the newspaper, because sometimes there's stuff that I've done that like, ended up in like style, or stuff that I've done that have ended up in like travel that, might allow you to explore an issue in a different way. So just paying attention to the kinds of different desks and who the editors are that are attached to those desks, that's really important. I would like just a small note that I forgot to mention earlier is that I tend to And I mean, all of this is from my personal experience because I know that maybe different photographers do it differently. But for me, for example, I don't mass pitch. So if I'm making a pitch, I already have the editor and the publication in mind for a particular pitch. Like going back to that, it's personalized, right? So let's say the whale shark story. Initially, you know, I guess like the part of me that thinks, oh, this might be a Nat Geo story, but actually I wanted to do it in a certain way. And so I thought maybe this would fit the dispatches section of the New York Times. So I pitched it to my editor there. And I tailor-made the pitch so that it would align with the interests of that particular section. Oh, sorry, what was the other questions, Danielle?
And you know, on that same note, when you're talking about like the different tasks, like how do you actually, like where do you go to find the editor's information and contact? Because that always seems to be like a struggle for a lot of freelancers.
Oh my gosh, I think it's a myriad of ways that you find out what people's contact information is. Like obviously, like building your photography community is the most important thing, meaning asking people if they know an editor for what. Like, I mean, that's always the first thing I do, which is like I ask my own personal network of photographers, which is why things like the Everyday Projects and Women Photograph and Diversify, all of these things are super important because it helps you build a community. That's one way. I definitely had a time when I would guess an editor's email. So, you know, like there's like a formula for how they make emails, email addresses. And so you just like kind of like write it because you see the masthead and then you kind of guess their email. I've done that. I don't know if I recommend it necessarily. And then there's also, you know, often it actually will be in the website or on Muckrack. There's the editors who actually want to be pitched to, editors who will allow themselves to be cold pitched, do leave their emails on their Twitter or their Instagram. So that's also a sign. By the time an editor sort of like puts their details on their social feed, that means that they're pretty happy to receive an email, I think. Because otherwise, why would they do that?
Yes, thank you. So we've got about 10-ish minutes more for some questions. So I think let's answer one that I think is just like a boom, straightforward answer. But a lot of people, even though you kind of went through it already, but a lot of people are still a little confused about, which I was too when I first heard about it, is mind mapping. Can you just like specific, like what is actually mind mapping? Like how do you start doing it? And by the way, I loved your cartoon of the fried egg for the promotion part. I was like, wow, that is exactly how I feel when I'm doing promotion. And also for those of you asking questions about like promotion and some other things, we have lots of classes today and tomorrow that will kind of touch on those things. So if we don't answer your question now about some like periphery topics around pitching, we will get to it later. So just make sure you're joining us or watching the recordings later. So, okay. On that note, Hannah, mind mapping. What is it?
Yeah, sorry. I feel like I went into it and I think I'm really like in my own head right now. But mind mapping is just a way to get like all the mush in, personally, this is my definition of mind mapping, but all the mush in my head organized, right? So I used to do this on paper on my own and I didn't realize that that was a thing and that, you know, like other people were doing the same things that I was doing. So there are apps like this one, Miro, is free and it just allows me to sort of like expand and make these like branches. And there's stuff that are more, there's mind maps that are more organized than this, but I like this sort of like whiteboardy situation. But yeah, mind mapping is just a way for me to organize my thoughts in a visual way where it's like all connected and it's webbed to each other so that I understand that the things that are happening to me are part of a greater ecosystem, if that makes sense.
Perfect.
Yeah.
It's like I'm quizzing you now. Okay, what's proof of concept?
What proof of concept? Sorry, yeah, proof of concept is sort of like the test run that you do. So for example, for lullabies, I went to one community and I spent one night with one family and photographed that and I recorded audio. That was not the lullaby story, but it was a bite of it just to show like proof that my concept that lullabies could be a visual story, that there's proof that it could work, right? And so I even put it in a website to show how it might be laid out, how the story might look, how you could look at critical issues through the lens of a lullaby. So that's what a proof of concept is.
Cool. Sorry, Polly. I'm just like, we got questions. We got to go. So sorry to keep jumping in here, but another question that I think is very relatable for all of us is, as a freelancer, where do you find the funding for a project when you were just in the preparation phase? You were in a lot of different places for a year and a half. How did you manage to finance it? So that's another like chicken or the egg question, right? I want to start this project. I want to pitch it, but how do I make the work if I don't have funding for the work? You know, it's like that mysterious question. So
yeah, I think for me as a freelancer, I always have to think of income as many, many different streams. Meaning, like, if I have a project, I know that it's not just gonna come, like, if I really want to do it, I better not be dependent on a publication, right? Like, if for lullabies, for example, I was gonna do that project no matter what. Like, I didn't care whether Nat Geo gave me a grant to do it or not. I really wanted to do it, and I was gonna do it little by little and work commercial jobs in order to make such a project, right? Because I was just curious, and this was something. So I think, like, if you have a project, figuring out funding is complicated, and I would never be prescriptive. I wouldn't be so silly as to prescribe like one way of funding it. But I think it helps to be assured that projects are funded through multiple different streams, and a lot of the great projects that we know, actually, if you go back and listen to photographer interviews, a lot of people kind of self-funded a lot of some of the best works. And so I think if you have like an idea for a story, like looking at the many different ways that it can be funded and trying to make sure that you apply for those is always good practice. And it actually, for me personally, my experience is that funders will much prefer to fund a project that they see is already going. Meaning you're already trying to find funding, meaning you're already like getting this off the ground. This isn't like an abstract idea in your head to get a grant so that you can be affiliated with the organization, right? This isn't like a project in your head that you're doing just so you can be published in the New York Times or something. So it's like, I think that like if you are thinking of the story first, the issue first, the project first, that's actually the chicken. If that makes sense, like or sorry, the egg, which one is it? Whichever, but it's the first thing. And then you just sort of find ways to bring it into life, and then you get creative. And I think that there's no sort of singular way of doing it.
There's a great question here that I think a lot of people fear about. You know, it's like you do a lot of thorough researching for all your projects. And then when you're pitching that, how do you protect your pitch in the sense like, how do you make sure a publication just doesn't take all the work you just did for them?
That's a hard one, to be honest, because it's hard to know, like if you're cold pitching, for example, it's hard to know what kind of editor or what kind of person is on the other end of the line, right? I think, and I've stopped doing this, so I don't know if I should be giving this out as a piece of advice, because I stopped doing this, but I used to build a moat, meaning I didn't give everything in the pitch. Like either I have a special access that I don't name, or, you know, like something like I used to write it into my pitch in a way that only I can do it. Like, so, you know, whether I already made the community contact or I already have like the in quotes subject, you know, ready. I don't, you know, give out that much information. I just give enough. And then, one of the things that I think is useful is like, sometimes it might be interesting to, sometimes it's helpful to, I tend to be a soft pitcher. Like I am not like a hard seller, meaning what I do is like, when I was starting out and when I was, let's say, doing projects that I already started or I really wanted to get off the ground, the language that I would say is I just want to share this project I've been working on. And then I say a little bit about it. And then I ask if you would like to know more, like I'm happy to like talk more or like get in a conversation, but I don't put like everything in it, right? So I think that there's many different, but most certainly you have to protect your ideas and you have to protect those things. So whether that's you're already starting it, let's say you already started it, making sure that you're not giving out like either like the organization you're working with or the person that you're working with. So making sure that you have that moat. Yeah.
That is great. And there's another question in the chat. You mentioned how you don't mass pitch, meaning you don't send the same pitch to multiple publications at the same time. So how long do you wait before you decide to move on to pitch somewhere else?
Anywhere from a week or two, I would say, depending on the urgency that I feel. I think if it's an urgent story, you don't wait that long. You don't wait more than a week. But if it's something that you can continually work on for a matter of months and it's near your home or something, then you can sort of wait. But I will also always give a heads up before I move on. I don't just because sometimes then the editor will reply like a week and a half later, and then you've already pitched it and then another editor is interested. And that's the pickle you don't want to be in, even if it sounds good. It's like, it sounds good because they're interested, but actually you've made yourself look a little bad. So I think in general, I wait like a reasonable amount depending on my project, and that's variable, but I will then always give a heads up to the editor, but very casually and very softly. Like I once had a student and a mentee read me like an email that they were about to write an editor, which was that they were pitching something and they gave the editor a deadline. I was like, don't maybe not give your editor a deadline to reply. Like, like these things are, I know that the project really matters to you, but and of course your time really matters to you, but these people, you have to also recognize how busy they are. And they're getting a lot of pitches. So, just be considerate as well and not demonize our editors.
Yes.
In fact, one thing that, and I take note too of the chat, Polly's dropping some recordings from previous seasons of the Essentials that are also sort of related to, what we're talking about here and from editors' perspectives. And one thing I really liked from the session from editors was they were like, we are your friends. Like, we are here for you. We're rooting for you. We are just so busy. And it's true. I don't think, we think we're busy. Editors have like 100 emails coming in their inbox per minute. So don't take anything personally. And absolutely, as Hannah mentioned, probably don't give a deadline for the pitch. Graciousness and kindness. I think we have maybe time for 2 more questions. I said that, but now I mean it. So have you ever had to change your story when you were in the middle of photographing? What happens when the story becomes different from what you pitched? You kind of touched on that a little bit. And then I'm also curious about this. It's kind of similar, but how did you become the writer for the environment story that you pitched? And you are an amazing writer. I love your writing, so genius. So I'd love to know like how you how does that happen that you also end up writing?
Oh my God, I do not like writing. I've realized that I am about to I have another story coming up that I wrote, but it was literally like my reporting partner who, Aurora, left the Philippines. So I had no choice but to write. And then the more you write your stories yourself, the more editors think that you can do it. So I actually don't love it in that, like, I would just rather photograph and then by the time I file it's done. I don't want to contend with a blank piece of paper. That is a whole other situation. I ended up being able to write, like for Lullabies, for example, I put my foot down in that because I said I wanted to write this. I have put all my entire time. like I would like to write this. This is my research, this is my story, these are my interviews. And also I don't want an audio producer, a translator, myself, and then a writer in a bedroom. Like this is too much, right? Like it's like this is too intrusive. So it was like a function of wanting a lighter approach. The other pieces of writing, I don't know how I started to do that actually. I don't even remember the first piece that I wrote. I think it was like really more like need. Like I think the first piece that I wrote for the New York Times was this dispatch in Mongolia, and they didn't have a writer there. So I was just like, I think I can write it. I can try. And then yeah, I literally just told my editor, I don't know if I can do it. And he was just like, all right, like we'll see if, the editor, let's see what the writing editor says. And then the more I did it, then the more they assigned me stuff to write. Or like when I pitched something, they're like, you're writing this, right? And so I don't know, like I have a weird relationship with the writing. There's that. And then the other question was,
I actually have a follow-up question to that.
mhm.
When you are wearing both hats, are you getting paid for both parts? How do you approach that?
Yeah, I get paid for both parts. I think I have one experience where they just forgot to pay me for both parts, but now I know to make sure that I ask for it. I think one of the best, I guess like one of the ways that I learned to write, like just to follow up on what I was saying earlier, was that one of the best gifts about being a photographer is that I actually get to work with writers, and I love working with writers. I love a good writer. I love an enabling writer who thinks visually and who interviews well. And that's how I know that I'm not a writer, because I know that their thoughts are very different from mine, and I know that they can come up with something that I cannot. Which is why like I still don't identify myself as a writer, but maybe that could also be imposter syndrome. But I think like one of the ways that we learn is by watching as well, watching colleagues. So I've worked as a translator, I've worked as a fixer, I've been beside writers who were like really intelligent and really good. And so that's kind of how I learned how to do it.
And then Danielle, I think you have one last final question.
Yeah, that other question was like basically what happens if things change in the middle of your pitch, if it becomes like a project, do you stay open to that possibility? Like how do you navigate that?
It's interesting because that happened to me just recently for the story that I pitched, and I went there and it was a fully different story. I think like maybe with time I've become more confident, so I just go with it. Like I file a different story. And like, like a slightly, obviously it was similar and it was the same place, it was the same community, but like I'm not going to file something that's untrue, or I'm not going to force an angle that isn't really there. And I think if you work with editors who are good, and generally like, you would hope that the publications that you work with respect like a story enough that they know that it's not always what we think. I just go with that, and I go with whatever the story is, because there's just so many stories, and actually there's so many ways that a place, a person can be interesting, that like if it's not what you initially thought the story would be, probably there's something even more interesting because it's actually what's happening. And it's just a matter of being observant, and it's just a matter of recognizing what's in front of you and paying attention to the right things, making the right connections, like building your own sort of like narratives, and making sure that like you're true to what is going on. So yeah, like, so I think with more confidence, I've been in this space now where I just file what the story is, and I've not gotten into trouble doing that. So yeah.
I love that. Confidence is important, and confidence with graciousness like you, Hannah. Okay, sorry. One more question, but this is easy. I know it's come up a couple of times, so I just got to ask you, what equipment are you using?
A Sony A7R3, and an R3, yeah, an R3, and usually a prime, just a 35 prime. So yeah.
Hannah, why don't my pictures look like yours then?
No, your pictures are amazing.
I'm kidding. And last very quick, easy question, the app where you had your multiple tabs open that you were using for research, is there a program? What app was that?
This is an app that I learned from like a New York Times writer. It's called Scrivener, Scrivener, and it basically allows me to have everything in one app. It allows me to have like one thing pulled up on the left while I'm typing on the right, or vice versa. It allows me to upload my audio interviews into the app so I can listen it within the app so I don't have too many things.
Amazing. We've talked about like apps and deepness. I mean, we've really covered it all. You're so awesome, Hannah.
Thanks for having me.
What?
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And I hope you have a second to kind of scroll up in the chat, because people have just been very appreciative and like sharing some intimate things about their experiences with Lullaby. So although now the thank yous are coming in, so it might be tough. But anyways, thank you again, Hannah, so much. We will be starting the next class in just a moment with Annie Flanagan, who is with us right now too. And I will save all of my gushing of them in just a moment. But we just wanted to thank Photo Wings again for making the essentials happen. This literally would not be possible without Photo Wings. For those who might have just joined a bit later, Photo Wings' mission is to highlight and help facilitate the power of photography to influence the world. As a nonprofit, they help photography to be better understood, created, utilized, seen, and saved, which I think we're already really digging into right now in the essentials.
And speaking of saved, we've seen this question a few times in the chat. Yes, of course, these classes are being recorded, y'all, and they're being transcribed. And you can find all of the classes plus our past 2 seasons on our sites. So the Everyday Projects, the Black Woman Photographers, and Photo Wings site. You can go check out the recordings there. And if you enjoyed, today's first class, tweet about it, share it on IG stories. I've already seen a few posts and tweets. Tag Hannah, let them know how much you appreciated all the knowledge they shared with us. And thank you all again for, spreading the word, telling your friends, and showing up and asking great questions.
Yes, and also as a remander, please save this link for tomorrow's webinar. It is different from the one from today. We will also be sending out an internal newsletter from the Everyday Project, so keep an eye on your inboxes, but go ahead and copy and paste that link right now for tomorrow's webinar. And as you all saw, those who registered, which would be all of you, do not forget that we have a meet and greet later today, where it won't be webinar. We can actually see each other's faces, say hello. That's going to start around 2:15 p.m. EST, so New York time. This is the link. This was not in the email, so please copy and paste it, save it now. Yeah, and we hope to see you all there. Come with coffee, whatever, and just meet some cool new people. So with that, thank you again, Hannah, and I think we're ready for our next class. Yay, thank you. You're so awesome.